والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. وقل رب زدني علما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اصبروا وصابروا ورابطوا واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. صدق الله المولان العظيم. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, we've reached the final ayat of Surah Al-Imran, which encapsulates basically the entirety of the teachings of Islam. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you people of Iman, isbiru. Observe patience, observe sabr. Of course, patience is not really, it can't encapsulate the meaning of sabr. But we'll try and explain this. So, before we do, there's 4 qualities which are mentioned here. O people of Iman, observe patience, isbiru, wasabiru. Sabiru is also a form of sabr, and it comes from mufa'ala, which means there's an interaction. So you should exercise within yourself sabr, and also you will have to exercise sabr in relation to external enemies or elements, and internal elements and internal enemies. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then rabitu comes from the same murabata, from rabt. Rabt is to tie something up, and so murabata is to, in the shari sense of the of murabata, which is a order of sharia for one to, or people to protect the frontiers or the borders where the enemy may attack, the Islamic country. And there's also the borders of the human being, because shaitan and nafs also attacks. So there's murabata, in other words, and in murabata coming from rabt, because they used to tie their horses, and stay in those places in guarding against the onslaught of the enemy. And then finally, taqwa. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. And observe taqwa, which is the entire gamut of the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we've mentioned in so many cases. So, going back to sabr, sabr is basically al-habs, tying and bringing something under control. Therefore, there's an expression that qutila sabran, that he was executed while being, tied up. It's a form of execution. Usually someone who's executed, they're tied up and they're bound. So, sabr requires a binding of the nafs, because there's 3 basic types of patience that one has to observe. One is to control oneself to continually follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That requires a patience to remain consistent on the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This also requires a control of the nafs. Also, controlling the nafs, which is even more critical and more difficult, to refrain from the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to refrain from engaging, and that also requires a control of the nafs. And then also controlling the nafs from the expression of what we call a jaza, which is when there's a calamity or a trial or tribulation which shakes us, our comfort and our, the normal, sequence of our lives. So we get flustered. Sometimes we tend to say things we shouldn't, think things that we shouldn't. So in this situation also, a special type of patience, a special type of, again, controlling the nafs, not to react other than the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased, in the way which Nabi alayhi salam has shown us, to remain patient, understand that everything happens according to Allah's will, and it's all in the best interest of the entire creation, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned. So whatever happens, we should remain patient therein. And then musabara, wasabiru. sabra. So again, sabr, there's going to be sabr with the external elements and external enemies. So it's a kind of competition of sabr. Because your enemies want to destroy you, and you will have to be over patient and not only win them in terms of the battle, but you'll have to win in terms of being more patient than them in remaining steadfast, in that endeavor. And the external enemies that we have to face are from time to time. Sometimes we may never have to face an external enemy as such, but we will continuously face the internal enemy of nafs. And the external enemy of shaitan is always there, and the internal enemy of nafs is continuously there. So that constant struggle is a lifelong process. And murabata, also guarding the frontiers of the country and guarding the frontiers of one's own self. So this murabata, there's a very great fadail, great virtues of guarding the frontiers in the borders of the Muslim countries, so that the enemy does not attack. And therefore it's mentioned that the one who will spend a night in guarding those frontiers, he will get a reward better than the person who spends the entire day fasting and the entire night standing in tahajjud. Why? Because his fasting and tahajjud is for him. Here, he is guarding the country so that the entire country can engage in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a very great action, a very great amal salih, pious action. And also similarly guarding, as it were, the oneself. And therefore also there's a type of murabada which Nabi alayhi salam mentions, that remaining from one salat in the masjid to the next salat. Dadikum ribat. This is also murabata. Why? Because you're guarding against the onslaught of shaitan and nafs in the environment by remaining protected in the environment of the masjid. So protecting on a greater macro scale and protecting oneself on a micro scale. And then obviously the observation of taqwa, which encapsulates all of that. Doing whatever Allah asks us to do and refraining all from what He asks us to refrain from. And لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that perhaps you will succeed. And definitely, as we've mentioned many times, that the perhaps element is perhaps from our side, not from the side of Allah. If we observe taqwa, definitely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring us to success. So the perhaps is from us, perhaps we will, perhaps we won't, but from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He will definitely give success to the people of taqwa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to be among them and grant us the tawfiq to understand these four qualities and imbibe them and be means of spreading them. Ameen. Ameen. Wa akhir da'wana. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum.